Live from Geneva again this morning, the site of the Putin-Biden summit. Biden, of course, is back in Washington now, but here's how he described his overall message to his Russian counterpart.
I told President Putin my agenda is not against Russia or anyone else. It's for the American people. I also told him that no president of the United States could keep faith with the American people if they did not speak out to defend our democratic values.
Russia and the U.S. did make some small agreements, including agreeing to exchange ambassadors once again. No major agreements. They were not expected by either side, but both leaders did describe something of a rapport, a constructive conversation, and perhaps relationship going forward. I'm joined now by Fiona Hill. She served as top Russia advisor to former President Trump. She is now a fellow at the Brookings Institution. Fiona, always good to talk to you.
Thanks, Jim. Good to be here.
So this morning, Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, released a statement. He says that Biden gave Putin a pass. Do you think that's a description backed up by the events here yesterday?
Well, it depends what he means by a pass. I didn't see the statement, but is it a whole pass? You know, a kind of a pass on, not mentioning or raising major issues? I mean, that's obviously not clear. I think, kind of part of our problem with the whole relationship is really our own domestic arena and the way we depict interactions. And it says more about our own politics, domestically, parties aren't infighting, than it does actually about the state of play in international relations. I think the important point is what happens after this meeting, because these are the kinds of meetings you routinely have to have with adversaries as well as with allies or, with more neutral countries. We've had a long history of meeting with the Soviet Union and also with Russia. President Biden, like any other US president, also has to meet with President Xi of China, which is, of course, our major competitor in the international arena right now. President Trump went with Kim Jong-un and had, an awful lot of accusations thrown at him as well, but that seemed to take down the temperature in that relationship for a while. We have to meet with the Iranians, as we are doing right now, to kind of try to figure out, how we put that relationship on a different footing and deal with the nuclear crisis with Iran. I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, we have diplomacy here for a reason. And the proof is what happens next. How do the Russians comport themselves going forward? Do they want to have other meetings? Do they continue to launch massive hacking attacks against us? Are there assassination attempts? Is there an invasion of another country, for example? And we have to now basically look at how things play out. Will there be another meeting on cyber issues or on nuclear security and arms control? So it's really kind of what happens next, not what just happened in the past now in Geneva.
And they did agree to set up working level meetings, for instance, on the possibility of prisoner exchange. The Russian president saying the Russian Foreign Ministry and the U.S. State Department will discuss that. But on cyber, of course, Putin had a whole different, state of denial about those attacks. I wonder, you said to my colleague last night on the air that you believe Putin may have reached a point where he is interested in lowering the temperature with the U.S. Tell us why, and have you seen evidence of that in the events yesterday?
Well, I did see some evidence of that in the events yesterday, just in the way that he talked about Biden himself, the president. I mean, these were not, massively complimentary comments that he made, but he was very careful in his choice of words. And although he went on a tear, as he usually does in the press conference about, the United States hubris, the kinds of things the United States does in terms of human rights abuses, this is their depiction, by the way, this was all kind of standard fare. It was entirely predictable. There wasn't anything that I heard him say that was out of the ordinary from Vladimir Putin. Now, in terms of taking the temperature down, let's just be realistic. I'm only talking about, some fractions of degrees here because we're in a pretty confrontational state. But Putin himself has got to get through the next several years as well. I mean, he hasn't outed the pandemic. Russia isn't. I mean, they've got very low vaccination rates. They've only got about 10% of their population fully vaccinated now. The Russian economy isn't doing great. They've signaled very clearly that they want to have investment. I mean, in fact, Putin was crowing about the fact that there were more American business people showed up at the recent St. Petersburg Economic Conference than other representatives. He might have been trying to make a point at the US expense, but it was also very telling that they want to have American business people and other people showing up. Putin has to get through some parliamentary elections in 2022, same as our midterms, and he does have to basically put himself forward for re-election in 2024. He can't just sail out to 2036 without having any elections here. So, there are things that Putin has to deliver at home too. He can't just strut about the world stage and, say he's a great power or a great leader. He has to show something too. Otherwise, there is not just opposition like Alexei Navalny, which of course he's stuck in jail and he's on a tear basically trying to persecute and get out of the way any real opposition. He does have people around in his own circle who are wondering, whether they might do a better job at being president. So, he doesn't have everything going his way, and how he interacts with the US president is going to be basically, kind of a sign as well at home about, how he is faring on the international stage and domestically.
The contrast between Biden and Putin in Geneva and Trump and Putin in Helsinki was just remarkable. I mean, dramatic, frankly. And you shared earlier this week that during that infamous Helsinki moment, you thought of faking a medical incident, pulling a fire alarm just to stop the embarrassment there. I wonder, knowing what you know about Putin, by the way, he even said this in his press conference yesterday, saying that Biden is very different from Trump. Do you think that Putin recognizes he can't push Biden around the way he seemed to be able to push Trump around, or at least have a meeting of the minds in the way that he had with Trump?
Look, behind the scenes, it was very different between Trump and Putin. There were actually, contrary to popular, kind of opinions, some, perfectly sensible discussions. And that's actually also happened at Helsinki, because President Trump was also trying to push arms control, strategic stability talks, exchange of meetings at the national security level, for example, a lot of things that have actually continued. It was the press conference and the whole public displays that were really extraordinary, unfortunate, humiliating, mortifying, pick your adjective. So Putin can't do that same thing. And it was very smart on the part of this administration and President Biden and his team not to have a joint press conference, but to do it this way, which is how we've done it in the past under previous presidents as well. So, once you get past the public spectacles, I think that there's obviously a lot of continuity in the things that the Russians want, and a lot of continuity in what we want. President Trump actually did want to pull the Russians over to the US side against China and also Iran. I mean, that wasn't really going to happen. But we can also see that President Biden and his team have got a strong focus on how do we deal with China. I think we all recognize that you can't put Russia in a box because Russia will basically shoot its way out of the box. You can't disregard Russia because Russia will make sure that you pay attention to it. But what we're trying to do here, I think, continuously as the United States, going back now till 2010, was China starts its rise after the Great Recession, is try to figure out how we can at least manage the confrontation with Russia so we can focus on China and also the instability that's potentially there in the Asia-Pacific.
And that's why we heard that word so often, predictability, stability of the relationship going forward. Fiona Hill, always so good to hear your analysis on this.